Welcome, fellow explorers. My name is Christian Alexanderson, and this is Hemlocks to Hellbenders, a podcast highlighting Pennsylvania's parks, forests, and great outdoors. In September of 2022, before leaving office, then Governor Tom Wolf announced the creation of 3 new state parks: Susquehanna Riverlands in York County, Big Elk Creek in Chester County, and Vosburg Neck in Wyoming County. While these new state parks were quickly opened following the announcement, they have not taken their final form. Before they can be completed, or really before they even start, these parks must go through a rigorous master planning process with numerous phases. There's the planning phase, the design phase, the engineering phase, and the construction phase. But in between those phases and additional processes, the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources must seek public input, hold public forums, and receive feedback from various stakeholders. The opening of the state parks to the public was the easy part. Now comes the hard part. What sort of trails need to be built or maintained? What kind of camping accommodations need to be constructed? What kind of activities should be allowed? How much parking should be built? What can be done now to mitigate problems that could occur 20 years down the road? The amount of questions that must be answered and properly addressed can be staggering. And with all of these parks in different phases, I want to give everybody an update on the progress that's been made at all 3 parks. Our season finale is meant to let listeners know when the various phases will be complete, what sort of activities and camping options will be available, and what the future holds for our 3 newest parks. And for this large task, I want to go straight to the source, the big cheese, the head honcho, the grand poobah. I'm excited to welcome John Hallas to the podcast. John is the director of Pennsylvania's Bureau of State Parks. John, thanks so much for joining the program.
It's great to be here with you, Christian.
What is it like to plan for the future of a state park in Pennsylvania?
I'd say first and foremost, it's exciting and demanding. We're planning for the future. We're planning for perpetuity. The resources, both natural and cultural, are so critical in all of our state parks, 124 of them. But when we're dealing with the planning for a new state park, we need to get it right. And I believe certainly that all of the professional park staff that are engaged in that planning initiative and endeavor feel the weight of that and know that history is watching. So it's important that we get it right, that we provide the services and the amenities, and we take care of the natural and cultural resources to meet our mission and mandate. And planning is certainly the first step for any new state park.
Can you tell us about the planning, design, engineering, and construction process for a new park?
I'll start off by saying it varies because each and every park is unique in its attributes and the natural and the cultural resources that it contain. And for a new park, for the 3 that we'll be talking about today, they certainly are unique. I mean, while there's some similar natural and cultural attributes that are important in each of the 3 parks, they really come to us with a unique set of needs and associated functions that we need to create to provide that safe access for the public to experience them. But yeah, I think first and foremost, exciting and demanding are the answers that come readily to mind.
The 3 parks that we're going to be talking about today, the 3 newest state parks,
Mhm.
their names are more than likely going to be changing. Is that right?
Well, when we announced them during the last 6 months of the Wolf administration, it was in September. We had the announcement for all 3 parks. We intentionally said that the naming was going to be provisional. That doesn't mean the names that are on them now won't ultimately be the names that stand the test of time. But certainly, I think we wanted to go through our planning and our due diligence as we were bringing these new parks into the system before we said, okay, this is definitely the last and final name that this park will receive.
Let's start with Susquehanna Riverlands in York County. Can you tell us about the plans going on there?
So we finished the master planning for Susquehanna Riverlands, and Susquehanna Riverlands went through a full blown master plan. There's different types of initial planning initiatives that we implement for a new state park, but Susquehanna Riverlands entailed a full blown master plan, and in that we're basically, I like to say, starting from scratch. The first thing we have to do with any park is to inventory and understand all of the natural resources and the cultural resources that exist in that park. And so we went through that process. We went through a rather deep engagement with the public on that process as we were cataloging and inventorying all of the important attributes of that park. So we finished that up in July, and the master plan was well received by the public, and we completed it, and we're sort of into that next stage. After we've gone through that basic blueprint that the master plan provides for, then we move on to design and engineering to bring those amenities and those features and those improvements that the park needs to provide for safe access and experiences on the park.
And as somebody that actually attended the public meetings, I just want to say thanks so much for keeping everybody so up to date about everything and the plan changes or the plan ideas that are coming through and really listening to the public. How important is that public process?
It's critical. Certainly, there's not only expertise um, that exists when we're engaging the public in a planning process that DCNR relies on and depends on, but there's also the sort of sentiment and attachments to the land itself that the public has and their expectations for it. So I think the public engagement process is critical in any planning initiative that we endeavor to take for a park, whether that's a new state park like these three, or changes or improvements to parks that are already in our system or have been in our system for a long time. We still want to reach out and make those connections. There's always It's not just the general public that we're engaging with. There's typically um, I would say invariably, every park has stakeholders and people that are connected. And if those stakeholders are nothing more than our neighbors and the municipalities that comprise the park, those are certainly stakeholders that we need to be engaged with as we move through a planning process.
What are the areas of Susquehanna Riverlands that you want highlighted and featured?
I remember, uh, Christian, when I first visited the park before we acquired it from Lancaster Conservancy and with Lancaster Conservancy, and they were, they were taking us on a tour, and it was their backyard, and so to speak, as they were looking at this potential acquisition that abuts conservancy land on one side, on the one side of River Road, and I was taken back by and immediately knew that the park's scenic vistas and views of the Susquehanna River were something that needed to be highlighted, that were going to be highlighted. There was one very sort of historic vista on the park already. Even though it was in private hands, people knew about it for a long time. But certainly the views of the Susquehanna River from the uplands, from the highlands of the park, were something that we knew were important, critically important. Uh, Also, access to Cadorus Creek and its confluence with the Susquehanna River. That was something that certainly jumped out right out of the gate. And the Cadorus Gorge, which is a whitewater run that worked its way down through an accessible area of the park close to the mouth of the Cadorus Creek with the Susquehanna River. Those were areas that we were going to need to focus on. One of the things that didn't I wasn't aware of immediately, but I became quickly aware of, were the important cultural and historic aspects of the park. The Cadorus Furnace, the Iron Master's house. I mean, these were things that not only did we were going to have to pay particular attention to the natural elements and features that we wanted to expose the public to, but those important and critical cultural and historic elements that we're going to have to address in our planning.
And I have to assume that that's a whole different kind of beehive to deal with is, obviously being able to grade land or build trail or make things accessible, but also when you have a historic building like the Cadorus Iron Masters Mansion that the park now has, what's the future of that? What kind of work has to go into making something that publicly available?
For those listeners that may not be familiar with the topography and terrain down there, it's on what we would call the perimeter of the park, one of our boundaries, um, and it abuts Cadorus Creek. And there's a furnace, there's an Iron Master's mansion, and there's other manufacturing assembly ruins associated with roughly 21 acres of land. And so connectivity and providing safe access to all of those historic features and tying them together through trails and accessible safe parking areas. Those are all considerations that we needed to take in, and we're still taking into account because we're making the plans for that in the future. stabilization of the historic features is like the first thing on the to-do list when it comes to cultural resources. And we are working with the Historical Society in York County to see some stabilization work to the furnace itself. That hasn't transferred to us yet, but we had to move quickly after we acquired the Ironmasters Mansion because it required immediate structural stabilization and building envelope work so that we wouldn't have further degradation. So we're in this sort of multi-phase process to stabilize and secure and improve ultimately to be able to make those connections for the public so they can access those sites in the future.
As somebody who lives in central Pennsylvania, one of the things I'm most excited about are the camping options that are going to be available at the park. What kind of camping accommodations will there be?
We're looking at a modern family campground, and so in Pennsylvania State Parks, our modern family campgrounds have a spectrum of overnight opportunities in their campsites, and that's been our plan for quite some time. We're proud of the amenities and features that our campsites provide for. It's everything from full utility hookups, water, sewage, and electric, through walk-in tent sites. We want to accommodate the full spectrum of camping experiences. We knew as we were modernizing our campsites and many campgrounds, but specifically in our plans for Susquehanna Riverlands, that we wanted to make sure that that full spectrum of camping experiences was available. So from an RV site where you can hook up water, sewage, and electric to a place where you can park your car and walk back in for a more primitive rustic camping experience with a tent. These were experiences we wanted to provide, in addition to what we call embedded roofed overnight. And in many of our campgrounds, and we have plans for this at Susquehanna Riverlands, we're looking at putting in camping cottages and yurts. And those are actually embedded in the campground, not a separate colony, but part of the campground experience.
What is a great gathering area?
So this is something we actually started many years ago, but it was in limited number, only at a few parks. We made a concerted strategic effort in the last, say, 4 years to create what we call great gathering sites now, and they are embedded in the family campground as well. But they're sites that can accommodate a greater number of campers to take into account that multi-generational family that wants to be on one site and not rent, three separate sites, which is often tough to get and reserve adjacent to each other. So these larger sites have accommodations for typically, again, full utilities, water, sewage, and electric for that RV hookup, multiple tent pads, and can accommodate, again, multiple families or a multi-generational family on one site. We've seen, in some of the earlier cases where we had them at only, I think, two parks in the system. If you go back before, pre-COVID, we certainly we saw the popularity and the desire, people traveling together, again, wanting to be in proximity with one another, especially if they're from the same family, or if they're close families, to be on that single site and have that site be set up to accommodate all of their needs.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like a group tent site that's available to the public.
It is and it isn't. Our traditional organized group tenting sites, I would say it is only because of maybe higher numbers, but our traditional group tenting sites, um, if you think about Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or a church group, traditionally camping in tents, and some of those traditional organized group tenting sites could accommodate 60, 70, 80 people in total. And those sites have typically been segregated from our family campground experiences. The size and the number of people congregating on one site from one group, it sets a different expectation for your camping experience. And these sites, again, while they're meant for more, our standard campsite in Pennsylvania is meant for like a single family unit, up to 5 people. Um, the great gathering sites are up to 15 people. You can maybe pull multiple RVs on the site and hook up, plus tenting pads for the tenting experience to be again in that defined camping space. So yeah, for a group, definitely, but not for the traditional groups that we've accommodated in our organized group tenting areas.
Do you see that being something popular moving forward with state parks because of not only because of the COVID numbers that have just skyrocketed going to state parks, but something of people wanting to expand how much they spend time outdoors? So they're going to want to bring a couple families together or a couple college buddies or things like that together. Do you see it being something that you want to continue doing in the future?
I think yes, we're definitely as we look at making individual campground improvements, not only making new campgrounds like we are at Susquehanna Riverlands, but when we're making campground improvements and reconfiguring our existing campgrounds, we're looking at opportunities where we can build great gathering sites because we know they're extremely popular, they're in demand. We don't see that trend diminishing, and our campground overnight experiences offer something unique. They're not a resort style private sector campground. They are embedded in the natural and cultural resources of the state park. So, yeah, I think we'll be looking to make additional great gathering sites when opportunities present themselves in the future.
Can you tell us about the concept of 21st century campgrounds?
Sure. The National Park Service certainly has moved into this endeavor. And actually, as they moved into this endeavor, they were consulting with Pennsylvania State Parks because they know the work we've done on our camping experiences, not just recently and not with our strategic plan that we launched, Penn's Parks for All, in 2021, but we've been working at modernizing and improving our campsites. If you roll the clock back 50 years, the expectation and the needs of our campers were vastly different than they are in the 21st century. And our campsites across the system up through the 90s really reflected these campsites that were very tightly packed, no buffer or spacing between them. Uh, a loop system is how most of our campgrounds were developed. Up until the 90s, uh, they were rustic in nature, and that there were no utilities available on site. We started modernizing in the late 90s into the early 2000s, mostly by providing electrical hookups for RVs. But that was the extent of it. We did in the mid 2000s started placing roofed overnight, as I mentioned earlier, camping cottages and yurts into our campgrounds to be serviced typically if it's a modern campground in Pennsylvania by a shower house restroom facility, usually associated with those individual loops. The concept of the 21st century is meant to address the needs of and desires of 21st century campers and what they're bringing and what they want to experience, not only while they're in the campground, but while they're in the park that the campground is associated with. So I mentioned it earlier, spacing and privacy and buffers. So how we lay out and configure our campground experiences, the individual sites, and how the sites are associated with the larger loops that the campground is comprised of. Those are all sort of 21st century concepts, and reconfiguration of how the sites are laid out is sort of the step one in that. Uh, Amenities that are unique and specific to the time we live in, Wi-Fi, and it's a question that I know the National Park Service is grappling with as well. But providing connectivity in our campgrounds and to allow our campers to extend their stay, because if they need connectivity for work, they can be, not that I recommend it, but they could be working and enjoying a state park campground and a state park all at the same time over the course of their stay, if we provide that connectivity. So it's certainly something in Pennsylvania we're looking at addressing. Um, I mentioned full service hookups, utilities. I think certainly for the traveling public and the campground experience, that's a 21st century concept that we've embraced in Pennsylvania significantly. And I know the National Park Service is there as they're looking at the concept of 21st century campgrounds and camping. They're looking at it. It's one of the reasons why they've 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 consulted with Pennsylvania State Parks is because of our concerted effort to provide more full service hookups. And as I mentioned earlier about Susquehanna Riverlands, we don't want to forget our traditional tent camping and that experience that it provides for, which is different than RV camping in a number of ways. Also in the infrastructure that's needed to provide for it, but in the experience itself, and to be able to gain that sort of spectrum of experiences all in one campground, I think is what the concept of 21st century camping is meant to address.
And now, let's hear from our sponsors. It's Saturday morning in your favorite kind of weather. It's a day for hiking. Clearly marked blazes guide you safely along the unobstructed trail, allowing you to get lost in the wonder of nature. Keystone Trails Association makes these moments possible for you in Pennsylvania's great outdoors. KTA's members are dedicated to providing, preserving, protecting, and promoting recreational hiking trails and hiking opportunities in Pennsylvania. Join KTA to help protect the trails you love. New members use the code HELLBENDERS at www.kta-hike.org to save $5 on a yearly membership. Are you looking for your next adventure? Unlock some of the best landscapes in Pennsylvania with incredibly detailed, highly curated, waterproof trail maps from the folks at Purple Lizard. They create extraordinary maps of Pennsylvania state forests for people who love to explore the outdoors. Find them at your local outfitters, bike shops, and bookstores, or visit purplelizard.com, where your next adventure begins. The Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation is celebrating their 25th anniversary. Since 1999, they remain a cornerstone in supporting state parks and forests by creating accessibility and diversity opportunities, restoring habitats, providing educational opportunities, engaging in advocacy, and promoting the health benefits of being outdoors. In 2007, they started to record successes. They and their 46 chapters had logged over 680,000 volunteer hours and completed more than 2,000 service projects. The work of the foundation and its friends groups could not exist without you. Thank you for being a part of a legacy of conservation for the future of Pennsylvania state parks and forests. To join their mission or to download resources for exploring state parks and forests, visit them online at paparksandforests.org. All right, back to the show. Trail development has been an important area of focus during the master planning process. How do you see trails being utilized at Susquehanna Riverlands?
I mentioned it when I first had my first visit at Susquehanna Riverlands. I knew the vistas, and it wasn't just the initial one that was accessible on the property, uh, and it's a great vista, but there are multiple vistas along the highlands between that very first vista that I visited, even downriver. There are a few more vistas, and then upriver towards the railroad trestle and viaduct as you're moving along that uplands area. So connecting all of those vistas, providing accessibility, and also providing a fully accessible vista that's not what we call one of the rock vistas. We there's field viewing opportunities and developing vistas that are more accessible off of one of the cleared old agricultural fields. So having a trail plan that made those connections to accommodate multiple ability types, um, building trails that provided connections from the uplands to the Cadorus Creek. Water access was also important and part of our trail planning. But the park is not in a vacuum. There's connections to conservancy land and the preserves that are directly adjacent to us. There are regional trails that will bisect the park. So having a solid, holistic trail plan to not only create the new trails on the park to make those connections, but making sure that we're providing the best possible connections to our neighbors as well as the regional trail system were a must.
Susquehanna Riverlands will be moving into the design and engineering phase in 2025. What does that entail?
So, as I mentioned, the master planning for the park is complete, and that really provided us with the blueprint of the types of amenities and the general layout of how those amenities will exist on the landscape of the park. We'll be moving into that, very robust and intensive design and engineering stage, and that's to provide those, precisely how many campsites and what type of campsites and how they will exist on the landscape uh, will be done. And so we're looking at probably being in design and engineering and permitting, because there's permitting associated with those endeavors, in 2025 and in 2026. And then moving and with uh, with construction being, I would say, phased in 2027 and 2028, to create those improvements and amenities on the park.
Moving on to Big Elk Creek State Park in Chester County, how has that planning process been going?
So we started at approximately the same time doing a full blown master plan at Big Elk. Um, we had some preliminary concepts that we communicated with the public and stakeholders in trying to get my timeline right, in the fall of 2023, and those concepts, preliminary concepts, were not received well, and so we had to take a step back from and pause where we were in the master planning. And what we ended up doing, DCNR, is establishing a task force that's comprised of stakeholders, local municipalities, the county, and the public are all engaged in this task force that are helping DCNR work its way through our master planning work for that park. We started that task force work with our partners in the spring of 24, and we are looking to complete that master planning work with the task force in the winter of 25.
And I have to assume this is why you guys have a robust public planning process.
We endeavor to again get all of the input necessary. We realized, I think, when those preliminary concepts were communicated, that we needed more work and we needed more engagement, which is precisely what we did. Very focused in a task force to provide that, and I'm thankful for the task force and the members of that task force that have participated in regular meetings since the spring of 24, to bring us to the point where we are getting close to having a completed master plan.
Hiking is an important feature of the park, which spans about 1,800 acres. What kind of trails are being proposed there?
As I said, each park is unique, and the lands that that comprise Big Elk Creek State Park had some historical trail use, um, even before DCNR acquired the property. And we acquired the property over a lengthy period of time. Unlike Vosburg Neck and Susquehanna Riverlands, we were acquiring the acreage that became Big Elk Creek State Park over roughly a 10-year time period. It was acquired in phases, and historic use was happening just because directly across the border is the Fairhill Natural uh, Resource Area administered by Maryland State Parks, and equestrian has played a large role in the historic use of that park, as well as the lands of Big Elk Creek State Park. Uh, Fox chasing and fox hunting, equestrian use. There were social trails. So it came to us with a series of things that we needed to assess in that initial inventory, and assessing the trails that were historically used, both for multi-use, equestrian, bicycling, hiking, understanding the natural and the cultural resources of that landscape, and what we wanted to achieve in a new trail system that would mesh and take in some of the historical trails also was important. So, access to Big Elk Creek was first and foremost an important point. That is the focal that water feature, that focal point for the park exists in the Big Elk Creek drainage and its tributaries. But also the most sort of sensitive and vulnerable natural resources. So providing a trail plan that would provide access to the focal points of the park while protecting the natural resources that are that focal point is something we've been working on and working towards in the master plan.
I was there on the day that it was dedicated, and there was a big ceremony. And one of the things you notice right away are the farmland fields. They cover a big portion of the park. How is DCNR proposing to use those fields?
So a lot of it, you're right. All the upland areas have historically been in agriculture for more than a century, and we knew, and even before, after we acquired the last acreage, but before the dedication of the state park, managing those fields was going to be first and foremost a challenge. Fields, particularly in Pennsylvania, need to remain productive if they're in agriculture, and if they're not, if they're left fallow, then you're plagued by the onslaught of invasive species and all the challenges associated with having to then try to rein those invasive species in or noxious weed species. And so, looking at the landscape and its ecological needs was one of the very first things that we needed to tackle with Big Elk Creek. And so what we're doing is we're needing to maintain agricultural leases on the property until until uh, resource treatments can be employed fully to have the park function as I would say at its highest ecological value and level. To that end, we've advanced riparian buffer plantings. The largest, and it may be the largest in the state. No one's checked me on this yet, but we've planted 74,000 trees at Big Elk Creek State Park, and we've also planted meadow plantings in some of those agricultural fields that abut the tributaries and the main stem of Big Elk Creek.
Yeah, I feel like you could say that confidently. That might be the most for
It's
buffers that
certainly
might
the
be the
largest in Pennsylvania state parks. I don't, but I haven't had anybody give me another project that is in the size and shape of the one that we've accomplished in 2024, and that was just accomplished in the spring of 2024.
There also seems to be a great opportunity for stargazing at the park. Is that something DCNR is also thinking about?
Certainly, stargazing and the nighttime sky and dark skies is something that we want to provide, and where we can in all of our parks. It's a unique opportunity, specifically in southeastern Pennsylvania, given the light pollution, the development, all that exists in southeastern Pennsylvania. When you think of dark skies and stargazing in Pennsylvania state parks, your mind, I think, immediately would go to Cherry Springs and the night skies that the PA Wilds provides for, and that's a very different landscape than southeastern Pennsylvania. But in southern Chester County, it's a little special spot when it comes to the lack of light pollution and the ability to stargaze. So certainly, our trail system in the future and our viewing areas within the park will be able to afford for that to take advantage of stargazing and the night sky. Getting a glimpse of the Milky Way anywhere in Pennsylvania is always a special thing.
And all we have to do is teach people to use red lights as opposed to white lights, and we're all set.
Exactly, and for those that are serious astronomers and astronomy buffs, and if they've ventured to Cherry Springs and Potter County, they'll know quickly if they light up a white light. That it's not something that is appreciated at all when one is stargazing.
One of the most important parts of the story of the park is its connection to the Underground Railroad. How will DCNR highlight this aspect of the property?
It's a tremendous, important landscape, and the Underground Railroad and their passage, the passage of enslaved people to the north, particularly in that area of Pennsylvania, and the use of those those rivers and streams and their tributaries to make their way north is an important untold story for us at Big Elk Creek State Park, and for that important story to be told and interpreted and given the justice and the time and attention that it deserves. In 2025, DCNR and the Bureau of State Parks will be moving into a cultural heritage planning stage for the park. And so detailed history and research needs to be done to bring those stories to light for interpretation at the park. But that cultural heritage planning is the first step in that, and then we'll be moving on after that heritage planning is complete, moving into the park's interpretive plan and using that information gleaned during the cultural heritage plan to flesh out and develop the interpretive story for the park and the interpretive waysides and the educational programming that'll be taking place in the future.
That has to be really exciting for you because, I mean, the Pennsylvania State Parks and Forests do such a great job of telling the history of not only, early settlers, people that have grown up and lived throughout the years, but also indigenous people. So being able to highlight the Underground Railroad in our state must be something that you're really looking forward to.
I really am, and you're right to note that the landscape, and I've said this about Big Elk Creek State Park before. It's the landscape itself that has historical significance and prominence. And the Underground Railroad is just one story. The history of indigenous people on the land and their use of the land, the history of the Underground Railroad, the history of our farming communities in that region are all important stories, and we will highlight and bring to light those stories in our interpretation of the park.
When do you expect the master plan process to be finalized and presented to the public?
We're looking at again completing the work with our task force that has been informing and working with us on the master plan, hoping to be complete this winter, and then looking in towards the spring of 2025, maybe mid-spring, rolling that plan out.
Unlike the other parks, Vosburg Neck State Park in Wyoming County has not required a full master planning process. Why is that?
It was property that was it was owned by the North Branch Land Trust, and it was open to the public, very much like Lancaster Conservancy preserves adjacent to Susquehanna Riverlands. Vosburg Neck was had a trail system. It had sort of a administrative and day use area already in place, and so the level of planning uh, didn't require it to move into the full blown master plan like Big Elk Creek and Susquehanna Riverlands did. That being said, we still did planning, and we're still planning with that, but we were able to, and we're going to be able to quickly move into design and engineering on the amenities and features and access for that park a little bit sooner than the parks that required full blown master planning.
Well, speaking of that design and engineering stage of the park, what sort of plans are being implemented? What are some of the things that you want highlighted?
But when you come into Vosburg Neck, uh, the landform itself is amazing. It's this big horseshoe of the Susquehanna River, um, and I believe it's highlighted in a mural in Tunkhannock, which is just right down the road. So it's been a noted landform, significant land feature on the Susquehanna River for a long time, and so one of the things we wanted to certainly do though is improve access to the Susquehanna River and the amenities that already existed, and also build off of some of those amenities like the trail system that was already in place. Uh, the day use area and what the visitor would expect when they come into a state park is really what we need to move into design engineering on, and we are. So having that established day use area for picnicking and trailhead access and comfort facilities. Those were the things that we knew we were going to be able to quickly advance in our planning and go to design engineering.
And I've been to Vosburg Neck. It does feel like a different state park. I mean, there's so many state parks, obviously, in Pennsylvania that you go to, and you're like, oh, this one kind of feels like this one, or it feels like that one. It kind of has
Mhm.
that, you got your moving water, you got some woods, got trails, but this one feels different. I think the fact that it contains buildings dating back to the 17 and 1800s is really special. What is DCNR doing to ensure that they're able to be explored for future generations? Those wonderful buildings.
Yeah, so the trail plan for Vosburg Neck and how we make those connections once the public arrives are important. When you first come into the what I call the day use area of the park, the main entrance of the park, There's a meeting place. It's a barn that's been used by the Friends group, the Friends of Vosburg Neck, for special events. But what's also unique about it is it's directly adjacent to the river and the main river access for the park. So ensuring that we have really robust and convenient access, connecting those built amenities and the buildings and structures to that river resource is what our focus is with our future projects on the park.
What sort of recreation opportunities at the park is DCNR working on to highlight right now moving forward?
Yes, boating and fishing and getting as close to or in the water as possible, at the Susquehanna River is first and foremost. So that recreation, that water-based recreation, the view anywhere along the perimeter of the park, and a trail system that takes you along the Susquehanna River is a primary goal in our trail master plan for the park. Connecting to and improving upon the existing trails, multi-use trails that are on the park. One of which takes you to a pretty remarkable vista in view of the Susquehanna River, and a sort of a look back across the neck itself. So yes, multi-use recreation, multi-use being whether you want to be on a boat or on a bike or on a hike. These are things that we want to make sure that our recreational amenities at Vosburg Neck accommodate for.
Is there something the public should keep in mind with regard to these three state parks as we move forward?
I just that's a great question, Christian, and it's been a question that I think we've wanted to answer and tried to communicate since we announced all three new state parks. Is that they're works in progress, so to speak. That while they were immediately open and accessible to the public, not everything that one would want to do on those parks was going to be available, and that it required our planning, our thorough planning, and then us to bring forth our resources to implement and make those improvements and make those enhancements that we know that the public needs to be able to fully use those parks. So I would say patience and trying to manage expectations, which is I think a great uh, a great vehicle for this podcast is letting people know what's there and what isn't there yet, and when they can expect some of these improvements and enhancements to land so they can fully enjoy the park.
Well, as somebody who loves our state parks and was really fortunate to be able to kind of fall in love and visit all of them and spend time in them, I just want to thank you so much for the work that you do. I really enjoy the parks, and obviously, if I say you're doing a great job, I'm sure you would say, well, it's the people that work every day at the parks that are doing such a great job as well. But I just want to thank you so much for everything that you do to make our parks so incredible.
I appreciate that, Christian, and I would be remiss if I didn't say it though. But the park professionals that are in our 124 state parks, uh, day in day out, year round, not only taking care of the natural and cultural resources, um, but the visiting public, and making sure that their visits are not only safe but memorable and enjoyable. That's first and foremost. Our parks professionals do that work in an exemplary manner. And I'm proud of the service they provide for all the citizens of the Commonwealth.
In my years of going to state parks, I haven't run into a bad DCNR employee yet.
That's great to hear.
John, thanks so much for talking to us. We really appreciate it.
Great to be with you, Christian. Thanks.
I want to thank my guest, John Hallas, for joining the podcast. He generously shared his time, knowledge, and expertise so that we could learn more about these three new state parks. We did it, y'all. Season 2 is in the books, but before we end this episode, I have some people I'd like to thank. Most importantly, I want to thank my amazing wife, Abby. She's been so supportive of this very time-consuming hobby of mine. She's helped come up with great ideas, suggested episode titles, and solved so many problems that I simply could not solve by myself. Abby, you're the greatest partner a man could ask for. Thank you so much for everything. I want to thank my mom and dad for their continued encouragement and support. Any bit of success I have can be traced back to your thoughtful parenting. I want to thank Sean Connolly for his mentorship and for inspiring me to start this podcast. Thank you to Wes Robinson with the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources for helping me secure so many amazing guests. I cannot thank our 2024 sponsors enough for their support. Thanks to Marcy with the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation, Brooke and Haley with the Keystone Trails Association, and Mike and Justine at Purple Lizard Maps. If you enjoy this podcast even a little, please support these three amazing organizations. They all care so deeply about our public lands and are doing such great work to conserve them. Please become a member or purchase a product. Thank you to Joan Menzer for supporting this podcast with your monthly subscription. You can do the same by clicking support this show in the podcast description. Thank you to my family and friends for listening and supporting the podcast. Thank you to all of our guests who have come on this podcast and shared their passion for the outdoors with us. And thank you to you. This podcast was never a guaranteed success, but thanks to you, this podcast found an audience that continues to grow. I'm so fortunate to have such wonderful human beings as listeners. You've gone above and beyond to support Hemlocks to Hellbenders. You've shared episodes with family and friends. You've purchased stickers at our online shop. You've commented on and liked social media posts. You've spread the word. Thank you for taking us on your road trips. Thank you for planning trips after hearing episodes. Thank you for continuing your love affair with Pennsylvania State Parks and Forests. Thank you for your support, encouragement, and friendship. Thank you for everything. We kick off our first episode of the third season in January. I hope you'll join us again. And lastly, I want to dedicate this season to my friend Adam Bricker. You may remember Adam from our episode titled Allegheny Island State Park, A Boater's Dream, A Runner's Nightmare in Season 1. He helped tell the story of my attempt to run a mile in Allegheny Island State Park. Adam was incredibly nervous to record the episode. He kept telling me that he didn't want to embarrass me, which he didn't. Adam passed away earlier this year. We had met when I created the York Beard and Mustache Club in 2011. Like everyone that knew Adam, we quickly became friends. We spent the next 13 years developing a wonderful friendship. Adam was a once-in-a-lifetime friend. His kindness and love was all-consuming. He'd go to war for you. He'd give you the shirt off his back. He'd love you no matter your flaws. For many, Adam was their closest friend. He was for me. While I'm glad our listeners were able to hear from Adam on the podcast, the episode did not capture his true personality. He was charming and sweet, and every playful dig was met with a smile and a childish twinkle in his eye. His incredible intelligence was only matched by his utterly sophomoric humor. Other than my family, Adam was my biggest supporter of my plan to run a mile in all then 121 Pennsylvania state parks in 2021. He joined me on several road trips and ran 25 parks with me. He told me several times afterward that it was the best time of his life. Hours in a car, talking about everything and nothing, going for a run, supporting his friend and having fun. I take a great deal of solace in knowing that. And when Pennsylvania added 3 new parks to the system in 2022, Adam made it clear that he would run them with me as well, which he did in 2022. At the time of his passing, we had additional adventures planned. We were both very excited for them, but they never happened. Adam has been the first real loss in my life, not counting my oldest relatives. It's been difficult to think or even talk about him, but it's important to keep his memory alive, even on a podcast about parks and forests. I feel incredibly fortunate to know that Adam never had to wonder how much we loved him, how much we supported him, how much we valued him as a friend, brother, and son. Every time we parted, I gave him a hug and told him as much. So to wrap this up, I would recommend to you, dear listener, make that phone call, send that text, or offer those words of kindness to your family and friends. Let them know how truly special they are to you, how much they mean to you, and how much of a positive impact they've had on your life. Leave no doubt, because you never know when's the last time you'll speak to them. Mine was March 4th, 2023. Adam, if you're listening, thanks for so many memories. Thanks for the love and support. Thanks for the laughs. Thanks for everything. We love you and miss you. This has been Hemlocks to Hellbenders. I'll see you out there. Hosting, production, and editing by Christian Alexanderson. Music by John Sauer. Graphics by Matt Davis.